I'm pretty sure he's still putting together his all-star band and touring, is he not?
Oh yeah, they're coming to Rep Arena,
Oh wow.
or at least that's what I heard on Facebook.
We probably better check that out, Doug, because that's probably going to be one of the last times we're going to get to see him. He's got, well, how old is he now? He's in his 80s, right?
Yeah.
Yes.
Or closing in on 80. Yeah.
It's an interesting concept. He brings in people that have hits, and they all get a chance to do their hits, and then he kind of closes things down at the end.
That would be amazing.
Yeah.
I love Paul seeing some of the things that he has did on KET. He came out and showed you how the Mellotron worked and how they figured out Strawberry Fields and how to make that kind of thing. He would actually show you some of the stuff they did, some of the craft of it. He did it in his older age, but I watched the tenor of the interviews of him in the 70s when I was a kid in person. I've seen them on the Dinah Shore show. I saw him on Dick Cavett. I saw him in everything they could be on, you know?
Hey, speaking of which, did you see that? Did you see the thing that Paul McCartney did with Rick Rubin, where they took the old masters and they sat down in a studio and basically dissected? Man, I'm going to tell you what that is. If you're a Beatles nerd, or even if you just have a passing knowledge of the Beatles and kind of like a few of their songs, it is well worth a watch, and it's so fascinating to see Paul McCartney nerd out on his own recordings, 50 some odd years later. And just completely, and he's such a fanboy about it too. And that's his own music. And he's in there just jumping around. And I mean, you could see the spark just kind of come back in him. And, you know, the past 40 or 50 years just completely erased from Paul McCartney when he's in that moment. It is so fascinating to watch. And some of the things that he points out throughout the journey, you know, if you're a Beatles nerd and you really, really, you know, paid attention to their music, particularly down toward the end, man, he points out some stuff that it's like, holy, I didn't even know that was going on in the background. Like Helter Skelter, for instance. Kyle.
That I do recall. But it's just like this odd piece. I just feel like I said they you know, the Who had just come out with like My Generation and they were hitting it heavy. There was a little bit of heaviness going around between Hendrix.
And you know, it's impossible for us to have this conversation about Rolling Stones and the Beatles without mentioning the Who, which is easily the third band in that stratosphere. I mean, if you were living in London in and around that time, there were just three bands. There was a lot of other bands to listen to. The Kinks had come on the scenes and so on and so forth, but those three, you couldn't go anywhere or do anything without people talking about those three bands.
There was four. I mean, the Kinks were in that quartet there. They were maybe number 4. Some may argue number 3. The Who, I've always just been amazed by them. And
as far as songwriting goes, I honestly put the Kinks number 2 under the Beatles, but that's just me personally.
That's what I was actually thinking.
The Kinks are amazing. That is such amazing, just funny, sad, sweet, just amazing songwriting.
100%. They're vastly underrated amongst that quartet, which is why I'm excited for the Kinks 60th anniversary. They're doing a lot of anthologies that are coming out, so there's going to be a lot of good Kinks stuff coming out, and a lot of I'm trying to remember the comp that just dropped, but a lot of it is Rick and Dave Davies, or I think it's Davis or Davies. I can't remember which.
Davies.
I think it's Davis because I remember someone.
No, Davies. 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 I know this for a fact. I'll bet you $1,000 right now.
Now there are Davies. There's a Davis County in Kentucky that's spelled Davies, but the Davy brothers are Davies.
Oh no! Wait a second. You're pronouncing it Davis, but it's still spelled Davies.
Yeah. There's a county.
Oh, okay. Hey, y'all may be teaching me something right now.
I just literally looked up the pronunciation. It's Davis.
Okay, but I was betting you $1,000 on the spelling. I thought you were spelling it like Davis. Okay. You know, I take that. I'm gonna put that grand back in my pocket. Thank you.
No, hey. I mean, those guys were. Apparently in this new comp, Ray Davis, Dave Davis, and all them are just trying to put out together what are like their most meaningful songs and like conceptual wise. And so I'm kind of curious what direction they go. And like I said, the godfather of Britpop, Ray Davis, is definitely one that I'm really interested in seeing what they do this year because they're I think, extremely influential but vastly underrated.
It's because they kind of had a gap in being good. They in the early '60s they were rocking, and they put out a few novelty songs in the mid '60s, but they really until Lola came out, they had a lull where they didn't really put anything out that was interesting. Then it was something completely. Lola was something completely different, right? It's a legendary song, but it was something completely different. It wasn't. It wasn't. You really got me now, or all day and all night. By the way, Jimmy Page actually played the guitar on both those songs. Y'all know that, right?
Mm-hmm.
And they,
I did not know that.
So that makes him definitely any way you slice it. Jimmy Page was part of the birth of heavy metal.
Yeah, Jimmy Page was doing a lot of session work before the Yardbirds and Led Zeppelin. Even during Yardbirds, when he was in town, he was in the studio somewhere recording for somebody.
And what's interesting about that for session work, right? You have to be really on your money. You can't ever be off. You can't even be the slice.
Well, and that's where he met John Paul Jones. Was in the studio. Yeah.
But if you listen to Led Zeppelin live, he's not a very he's precise he alliterates very much, and I wouldn't call his playing accurate, but I believe it's some of the greatest.
He's kind of sloppy.
But I actually believe he is the greatest blues guitarist that I've ever heard. In terms of how good he is at playing the blues, I believe of all that I ever heard, Page was the greatest blues player ever heard. He's at least the equal of Hendrix, who is I feel the greatest blues player.
Stevie Ray Vaughan, what?
Well, Stevie Ray Vaughan rehashed the stuff they'd already done. He didn't innovate.
Yeah, but you can listen to one lick from Stevie Ray Vaughan and tell that's Stevie Ray Vaughan.
Oh yeah. Now he's slick.
He had a very distinctive guitar style that you can pick out of a room full of guitarists.
Well, I think he was one of the greatest players that ever lived, performer wise. But I think that Page and Hendrix were better blues players. I know it's crazy, but to you guys, but Since I've Been Loving You is the most prototypical.
I got to give that one to Hendrix because Hendrix actually cut his teeth on the Chitlin circuit.
Oh, Hendrix.
I mean, he is the blues. He walked that mile. You know what I'm saying?
A better blues player than Hendrix. But I thought Page was of near equal stature as a blues player. Now, as an overall guitar player, Page is also very influential, but Jimi Hendrix is obviously the most influential guitar player that ever lived. I don't want you to think I'm down in Page at all because, but Page also had a little bit of the same thing that we were talking about with Keith Richards versus the Beatles guitarists, John Lennon and Harrison. They had a little bit of that British thing that they just couldn't get rid of when they played. It very prim and proper, and the chords were where they were supposed to be, and they could tell you exactly what chord they were playing, and so on and so forth. Where Keith Richards is up there, just I don't know, it's an A somewhere, I don't know. Just look at my fingers and follow me, kind of like Chuck Berry, like his idol Chuck Berry. He opened Tuesday, so he can't miss.
Yeah. My favorite thing you bring up that is the story of Pete Townshend's windmill. He said he saw the Rolling Stones the one day. He saw them opening up, and he saw Keith doing a windmill. So he thought that he was emulating his hero. And he went back to Keith Richards and saw that he wasn't doing the windmill anymore. And he was apologizing. I'm like, hey, I'm sorry I stole your movie. Keith Richards looked at him like, the fuck are you talking about?
Yeah, he was so high, he didn't even know he was doing the windmill. He was probably just stretching his hand just to get it to move again because he was probably on something pretty.
What Chuck Berry known for doing that?
Absolutely, yeah.
So he probably stole enough Chuck Berry because everything's derivative. Every guitar lick that I ever played in my life is derivative, whether I know it or not. It's totally derivative. It's something I heard. I know I've thought I've invented stuff. I'm sure I believe I've invented stuff, but I believe that everything that I've ever played has been derivative. So even high school and maybe even elementary school band stuff. So I believe all of it's derivative, right? And the fact that they got their own flavor out of taking a whole entirely different art form that they'd only heard on the BBC, basically, and old records they could get, and they turn it into their own band of rock and roll. Makes me really respect the British blues guys.